Resident Evil has some of the most detailed outbreak zones in video game history. From gothic mansions to destroyed megacities, every single one follows the same pattern. Hidden labs beneath something familiar, a virus escapes, people get turned into monsters, and then someone pushes a button and blows it all to hell. So today, I'm breaking down every major location, how the infection spread, and exactly how they tried to erase the evidence. Starting with the one that kicked off the entire franchise, Spencer Mansion. Before Raccoon City burned, before any of this went global, there was a single estate in the Arklay Mountains that should not have existed, and I can prove it. The Spencer Mansion outbreak kicks off in summer 1998 when STRS teams are sent in after weeks of bizarre cannibal attacks nearby. But the mansion's real horror starts decades earlier. In the late 1960s, Oswell Spencer hires architect George Trevor to design a luxury estate that isn't actually a luxury estate. It's a death trap. Moving walls, hidden elevators, puzzle locks on every door. Trevor's own family is used to test the traps and dies in the process, years before any virus exists. Beneath the ballroom sits a full umbrella laboratory where the T-virus is developed. When containment fails, researchers turn into zombies, experimental animals escape into the surrounding forest, and the infection spreads outward until it puts STORS on the doorstep. By the time Alpha Team arrives, the estate is a vertical tomb, luxury on top, cages and test chambers below. Albert Wesker initiates the self-destruct as part of his plan to fake his death and steal Umbrella's data. The explosion collapses the underground labs and erases the mansion entirely. The most disturbing part is that Spencer built this place to be a nightmare on purpose. The architect finished the labyrinth, and then Spencer had him killed too. The virus just gave it teeth, but at least the Spencer Mansion stayed in the mountain. The next location took an entire civic building down with it. Raccoon City Police Department. The RPD is a repurposed early 20th century art museum, which sounds fancy, until you realize that means officers responding to a zombie outbreak have to solve art puzzles to reach their own storage rooms. The station was converted into police headquarters in the mid-1990s, a few years before the outbreak. This explains the grandiose main hall, the towering goddess statue, and the fact that critical doors are secured by 3 medallions, spade-shaped keys, and gemstone-fitted reliefs instead of normal key cards. Nothing says effective law enforcement like aligning mythological symbols just to reach the evidence locker. But here's where it gets darker. Chief Brian Irons, corrupt and on Umbrella's payroll, deliberately maintained the building's eccentric layout to reinforce his own control and indulge his sadistic hobbies. The RPD isn't a poorly designed civic building. It's an institutional death trap engineered by a man who wanted it that way. When the outbreak hits, the station becomes a convergence point for infected officers returning from patrol, civilians in holding cells, and contaminated ventilation systems. Lickers exploit the high ceilings and narrow corridors. Mr. X, the T-00 tyrant deployed by Umbrella, patrols methodically through the halls, forcing survivors into constant, desperate motion. Limited exits are sealed or blocked, and once zombies breach key internal corridors, everyone inside is simply trapped. By the time Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield arrive, most of the survivors die during the events of the game. The RPD is Raccoon City in microcosm, a place meant to protect people, where image and performance took precedence over function, and when disaster struck, the city paid for it in blood. But one building was just the beginning. Wait until you hear about the entire city that got turned into a crater. Raccoon City. Raccoon City is a company town, and the company is Umbrella. Every factory, hospital, and underground lab ties directly back to corporate payroll, which means when things go bad, accountability gets sacrificed faster than a test subject. The pre-outbreak population sits around 100,000 residents. By October 1st, 1998, survivors number in the dozens. Here's what nobody talks about. The city doesn't fall in a single explosion. It collapses over roughly 1 week in late September 1998, 2 months after Spencer Mansion. The T-virus spreads through multiple vectors, contaminated rats crawling through sewers, flushing infected waste into water mains, turning grocery stores and bus stops into zombie choke points. Then William Birkin injects himself with the G-virus after Umbrella's own security forces gun him down in the sewers, adding a secondary layer of viral contamination that makes an already catastrophic situation exponentially worse. Peak chaos hits September 28 to 30. The streets are gridlocked with overturned cars and flaming barricades. Alleys that used to be shortcuts become dead ends, packed with infected. Every familiar urban space, the kind you walk through every day without thinking, turns into a tactical nightmare. And the response? A government-authorized missile strike vaporizes the entire city on October 1st. Structures, roads, people, all of it reduced to a massive crater. The official story calls it containment. The reality is a grim political calculus. It's cheaper to erase 100,000 people than hold a corporation accountable. Survivors like Jill Valentine and Leon Kennedy become inconvenient living evidence, witnesses to an urban execution disguised as a biohazard protocol. This is the moment Resident Evil stops being gothic horror in an isolated mansion and becomes a techno-thriller about geopolitics, cover-ups, and how fast a city can be written off when the math says it's worth less than the scandal. But at least it was just one city, unlike the militarized prison island that got bombed into rubble for similar reasons. Rockfort Island. Rockfort Island might be the most confused piece of real estate in the entire franchise. On paper, it's a prison, but it's also a military training facility, an aristocratic palace, and a research lab, all on one remote island operated by Umbrella, which is, not ideal. The architecture makes zero sense unless you understand that the Ashford family built this place. The prison complex sits within sight of Baroque ballrooms filled with family portraits. Inmates stare through bars at chandeliers and oil paintings of inbred nobility. The palace features hidden switches inside antique music boxes, portrait galleries with secret passages, and a private dollhouse suite tied to Alfred Ashford's split persona obsession with his twin sister, Alexia. Torture cells exist directly beneath rooms decorated like a European estate. In late 1998, a commando unit led by Albert Wesker raids the facility and releases bioweapons across the island. The T-Virus tears through the confined population with brutal efficiency, because isolation, Rockfort's greatest strength, becomes its fatal weakness. No evacuation routes, no backup, just cells, corridors, and ocean. But the real prize on Rockfort isn't the T-Virus, it's the T. Veronica virus, developed by Alexia Ashford through decades of research. Alexia placed herself in 15-year cryogenic sleep to allow full viral assimilation, meaning Rockfort has been quietly harboring one of the most dangerous bioweapons in the world the entire time. By the time Claire Redfield arrives, the island is already doomed. Shortly after Wesker's assault, Rockfort is bombarded with missiles. What's left of the prison, the palace, and the training facilities burns to rubble. The Ashfords' obsession with their family legacy ends where it began, isolated, burning, and erased from the map. But if you think one ghost island is disturbing, wait until you hear about the cruise ship where luxury and horror collide in the middle of the Mediterranean. Queen Zenobia. The Queen Zenobia is a luxury cruise ship operating in the Mediterranean, which sounds great until you realize it's secretly controlled by a bioterrorist organization called Il Veltro, and used as a floating laboratory for a water-based virus that could destroy entire coastal cities through the drinking supply. Not ideal. The upper decks look exactly like you'd expect from a Titanic-style liner. Art Deco dining rooms, velvet-roped casinos, gilded theaters. All of it now deserted, lit only by flickering emergency lights, casting long shadows down empty corridors. Just the hum of failing generators and the distant groan of steel under stress. Below those public spaces, hidden in service corridors and engine rooms, are laboratories storing T-Abyss, a marine-adapted variant of the T-Virus designed to spread through water. This is the nightmare scenario, a pathogen that doesn't need bites or airborne transmission, just contamination of a single water source. Drop it in a harbor or coastal treatment plant and entire cities drink themselves to death. The ocean itself becomes the weapon. Il Veltro deliberately flooded entire sections of the hull to create breeding grounds for ooze creatures, gelatinous mutants with elongated limbs that slide through flooded corridors, climb walls, and ambush from submerged doorways. The architecture isn't just claustrophobic because it's a ship. It's claustrophobic because there are no streets to escape into, no open fields, just steel walls, churning ocean, and rising water that turns every hallway into a potential drowning chamber. By the mission's end, the Queen Zenobia is listing heavily, taking on water from explosions and structural damage, sinking into the Mediterranean with its laboratories and most of the T-Abyss samples, a symbol of luxury and global tourism turned into a silent doomsday vessel that could have poisoned half of Europe's coastline. But at least it's just one ship sinking quietly into the ocean, unlike the next location Plantation, which is a family home in Louisiana that becomes ground zero for a fungal nightmare that rewrites the rules of infection entirely. Baker House. The Spencer Mansion was aristocratic horror, marble statues, grand halls, puzzles carved into expensive furniture. The Baker House is something else entirely. It's a rotting Louisiana plantation near Dolvay, and it doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is, a real family home, violently corrupted from the inside out. Events occur in 2017, long after Raccoon City, but the scale is smaller, more intimate, and somehow worse because of it. Here's what happened. In 2014, the Bakers rescue what appears to be an orphaned child named Eveline from a shipwreck in the nearby swamp. Compassionate people doing a compassionate thing. Within days, the mold infiltrates their bodies and minds. Eveline is an E-series molded bioweapon, a fungal organism designed to spread through physical infection and psychic domination. By the time they realize something is wrong, they're already gone. The mold spreads throughout the house like a living organism, infiltrating walls, floors, air ducts. Black tar-like fungal growths ooze from every surface, giving rise to humanoid creatures called molded. The estate consists of the main house, guest house, boathouse, and outbuilding surrounded by swamp. Every single space becomes a trap. Narrow staircases, hidden passages behind walls, crawl spaces that force you into close contact with things that should not exist. Lucas Baker, one of the sons, constructs elaborate traps under Eveline's influence. Bomb collars, saw-like death game contraptions, shadow projector puzzles that require aligning objects to form specific silhouettes just to unlock a door. The family home becomes a theater of cruelty, each room a stage for torture. But here's the thing, this isn't some corporate lab gone wrong. This is a dinner table where a family used to eat, a bedroom where a child used to sleep. The horror is domestic, and that intimacy makes it unbearable. After Eveline is defeated using a specialized serum, her rapidly aging body crystallizes and disintegrates. The mold network collapses. The infection dies with her, but the house remains, a monument to what happens when compassion meets something that was never meant to exist. But if you think one ghost is disturbing, wait until you hear about the feudal fortress ruled by a 9-foot-tall vampiric noblewoman conducting Cadou parasite experiments in the shadow of an ancient fungal root system. Castle Dimitrescu. Almost every Resident Evil location is horrifying because something went wrong. But Castle Dimitrescu is horrifying because everything went exactly according to plan. This is not a containment failure. This is a feudal fortress purpose, built to feed on human beings, where torture, blood harvesting, and parasitic experimentation are the point. Lady Alcina Dimitrescu, a 9-foot-tall vampiric noblewoman, mutated by a Cadou parasite derived from the mold, presides over the entire operation like a feudal lord. Her 3 daughters are not her actual children. They are mutant constructs formed from flies coalescing around parasite-infused host material, which is, not ideal. Grand halls filled with gilded portraits and crimson drapery sit directly above torture chambers disguised as cellars, and a network of catacombs lets Dimitrescu and her daughters move unseen through the walls, turning the corridors into a predatory circulatory system. Below all of it sits the Megamycete, a colossal fungal root organism linking every location in the region through a mold network. The Cadou parasite itself is derived from Megamycete fragments, implanted into villagers during rituals and experiments. In Dimitrescu's case, the parasite interacts with a pre-existing blood disease to produce her towering stature, vampiric regeneration, and the castle full of lesser mutants representing failed implantations. Vampire folklore gets reinterpreted through bioweapon science, and the result is a castle where every bottle of wine is a war crime. When Ethan Winters kills Dimitrescu in her dragon-like transformed state, sections of the castle crumble and burn. The later destruction of the Megamycete destabilizes the entire region, bringing the castle's role as an active experimentation site to a permanent end. Unlike Raccoon City's clean erasure by missile, Castle Dimitrescu's end is quieter but no less complete. But if you think a single aristocratic death cult is disturbing, wait until you hear about the research facility built at the literal bottom of the world, Umbrella Antarctic Research Facility. Building a Baroque family shrine in Antarctica is objectively insane, and that's exactly what Umbrella did. The Antarctic facility isn't just a research lab dropped into the ice. It's a full cathedral to the Ashford family legacy, complete with portraits, statues, and cathedral-like halls, all buried beneath glacial formations locations at the literal end of the world. The logistics alone are absurd, transporting equipment, personnel, and structural materials to one of the most hostile environments on Earth, then carving tunnels through ice and rock to house cutting-edge bioweapons research. Peak umbrella arrogance, the facility's architecture layers industrial labs with family shrine spaces, creating temperature gradients that range from climate-controlled chambers to sections exposed to sub-zero Antarctic conditions. Walk into the wrong corridor unprotected and you freeze instantly. Creatures behave differently depending on the zone they're in. The entire complex is designed to weaponize the environment itself, and at the center of it all is Alexia Ashford, who in 1983 placed herself in cryogenic sleep for 15 years to fully bond with the T. Veronica virus. That's not a failed experiment or a desperate gamble. That's ultimate commitment to viral symbiosis. She willingly spent a decade and a half frozen in stasis, waiting for her body to fully integrate with a pathogen that would give her godlike control over organic matter. When she wakes up, the facility transforms. Veronica doesn't just infect organisms. It enables rapid plant-like proliferation. Vines erupt from walls. Spores fill the air. Chitinous growths sprout from infected personnel and fuse with machinery. Blood and vegetation merge with steel and circuitry, turning the facility into a living organism under Alexia's influence. The architecture itself becomes hostile, breathing and bleeding and growing in ways that make navigation a nightmare. Claire and Chris Redfield arrive during the facility's final act. During the battles with Alexia, they trigger explosive cascades and structural failures across multiple sections. Ceilings collapse. Ice caves give way. The cathedral-like halls are buried under falling debris and Antarctic landscape. By the time the Redfields escape, the facility is effectively entombed under ice and rubble, with nature itself serving as the primary containment barrier. The Ashford saga ends frozen, buried, and forgotten, a monument to bioweapons hubris left to rot at the bottom of the world. But if you think a frozen lab in Antarctica is extreme, wait until you hear about the Spanish Village, where an entire community was enslaved by parasites and turned into a synchronized weapon. Los Illuminados Village. The Los Illuminados Village in rural Spain is something worse than a containment failure. An entire community deliberately enslaved by a parasitic cult and turned into a synchronized weapon. When Leon Kennedy arrived in 2004, he walked into a place where every farmhand had been converted into a ganado, and every alley was a potential kill box. The transformation happens through Las Plagas, ancient parasitic organisms revived by cult leader Osman Sadler. Unlike viruses that spread through bites or airborne contact, plagas are physically implanted into hosts, bonding with the nervous system to enable both enhancement and total mind control. The entire village population was systematically converted through deliberate implantation. Not an accident, not a containment failure, a coordinated rollout. What makes it tactically horrifying is that ganados retain human intelligence. They wield weapons, coordinate ambushes, and communicate with each other. These aren't mindless zombies stumbling forward. They're farmers and villagers who still remember how to use a pitchfork or a chainsaw, just under complete cult control. Houses that once sheltered families become kill boxes. The central church becomes cult headquarters. Every building can be breached from multiple directions, turning exploration into a constant calculation of sight lines and escape routes. The most disturbing detail is what the village almost became. Ashley Graham's planned implantation would have carried plagas directly into the White House. A rural backwater, written off by the outside world, almost became the launching point for a parasitic infection with global reach. Leon kills Sadler and escapes, but there's no canonical cleanup operation shown. No missile strike. No international investigation on screen. Just silence and a village left to rot in the Spanish countryside. Did the Spanish government quietly sterilize the region, or was it just forgotten? The series never confirms it either way, which is, not ideal. But if you think one enslaved village is disturbing, wait until you hear about what happens when an entire African city district gets turned into a live testing ground for parasites. Shiva's Kijuju Autonomous Zone. Kijuju is a heavily populated West African urban district. Thousands of people live there. In 2009, Tricell Corporation uses the entire place as a live petri dish for bioweapons. And before you write this off as some isolated lab gone wrong, let me be clear. This was deliberate. Checkpoints, fences, armed patrols. The whole security theater wasn't there to keep people safe. It was there to keep out outsiders away while Tricell ran experiments under the guise of quarantine operations. The pathogen distributed to the population is type 2 Las Plagas, a refined version of the parasite from Spain. But here's where it gets worse. Unlike the rural ganados in Spain, who stumbled around with pitchforks and chainsaws, Kijuju's Majini retain full tool use, communication, and coordinated tactics. They use firearms, they drive vehicles, they set ambushes with heavy weapons. An entire urban district of organized, armed, parasite-controlled residents. And that's not even the worst part. Tricell also uses Kijuju as a testing ground for Ouroboros, a virus-parasite hybrid that manifests as writhing black tendrils. It consumes biomass to form gigantic amorphous monsters. Drop a sample on someone and watch them either become a living weapon or dissolve into meat. The entire region becomes a field test for both mass mind control and biomass-absorbing nightmare fuel. There's an uncomfortable real-world echo here that's impossible to ignore. Medical exploitation in the Global South has a documented, horrifying history. Tricell takes that blueprint and runs it at industrial scale, turning civilians into test subjects under the cover of a security crisis. Thousands converted, thousands used, and by the time the BSAA intervenes, it's too late for most of them. Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar eventually kill Albert Wesker by dropping him into an active volcano and detonating missiles, destroying the primary Ouroboros sample and inflicting heavy damage on Tricell's facilities. But the Majini are still out there. The Plaga remnants are still in the population. Kijuju doesn't get a clean missile strike like Raccoon City. It gets a messy, incomplete intervention and then silence. At least Kijuju had some international response, unlike the quiet horror waiting in Tall Oaks. Tall Oaks. Raccoon City taught us that when a viral outbreak hits a modern American city, the government's preferred solution is to drop a missile on it and pretend the whole thing never happened. Tall Oaks in 2013 proved that nobody learned a single thing from that disaster, except this time they made it worse on purpose. The outbreak begins at Ivy University during a presidential address. Someone deploys aerosolized C virus gas inside the venue, and within minutes, attendees start transforming. The President of the United States himself gets infected, bites a Secret Service agent, and becomes a zombie in front of his own security detail, the sitting commander-in-chief, dead and reanimated before the speech even finishes. That's not just a biohazard event. That's the symbolic collapse of political order happening in real time. But here's where it gets worse. The C virus doesn't spread slowly through bites and bodily fluids like the old T virus. It's airborne, fast, and catastrophically efficient. Thousands of civilians across Ivy University's campus, lecture halls, laboratories, dormitories, all of it are infected or killed within hours. The streets jam with cars driven by people turning mid-traffic. Pileups block escape routes, fires spread. The entire urban infrastructure of a modern city collapses before emergency services can even coordinate a response. And the authorities' plan? Authorize a missile strike to sanitize the outbreak. A conventional strike designed to level the city and destroy the infection, along with everything and everyone still inside it. It's not containment, it's annihilation dressed up as public health policy. Whether that's incompetence, desperation, or deliberate malice is anyone's guess, but the result is identical either way. Tall Oaks is effectively lost. Survivors number in the dozens, maybe low hundreds at best. A functional American city with a university, a subway system, high-rises, shopping districts, all of it erased in less than a week. And unlike Raccoon City in 1998, this happens in 2013 with global media, smartphones, and social networks. The idea that you can cover up the destruction of an entire city in the age of instant communication is laughable, but somehow the world moves on. But if you thought one American city going dark was bad, wait until you see what happens when the C virus hits a megapolis with millions of people and no plan beyond hope. The protagonists kill the right people fast enough. Lanxiang. Almost every location in Resident Evil ends in fire, erasure, or nuclear sanitization. But Lanxiang doesn't get that luxury. It's a coastal Chinese megapolis with millions of residents, gleaming skyscrapers, dense urban cores, and zero chance of being quietly buried. In 2013, it becomes the largest coordinated C virus attack in recorded history, turning an entire modern city into a televised bioweapon demonstration, and the world can't look away. The C-Virus produces 2 nightmare tiers. Standard zombies flood the streets, but that's almost quaint at this point. The real problem is the Javo, intelligent mutants who retain enough cognitive function to wield firearms, pilot motorcycles, and adapt their own bodies mid-combat. Get shot, grow armor plating, lose a limb, sprout a tentacle cluster. They're not shambling, they're hunting. Then you add the massive BOWs like the Ogremon, 30-foot bioweapons that rampage through skyscraper canyons and smash elevated highways into rubble. This isn't a horror scenario anymore, it's a military siege. High-rise buildings become vertical death traps, stairwells blocked by debris, elevators failing mid-climb, rooftop evacuations intercepted by airborne creatures. Players navigate collapsed skyscrapers tilting at dangerous angles where entire floors have sheared off and corporate architecture turns into vertical climbing puzzles. The slum districts are worse in different ways. Narrow alleys, rooftop mazes, stacked apartments where Javo flank from 3 directions at once. Ports turn into logistical nightmares, shipping containers stacked into improvised fortresses, cranes toppling, dockworkers turned Javo coordinating with military precision. But here's the thing, unlike Raccoon and Tall Oaks, Lanshan doesn't get erased by missile strike, partly because sanitizing a city this size would require multiple warheads and invite international catastrophe, partly because by 2013, anti-bioterror strategy has matured just enough to attempt containment instead of erasure. Chris Redfield and others hunt down the source, destroy production facilities, and kill the primary bioterror actors. Large sections of Lanshan are left in ruins, entire districts devastated, but the city itself survives. Casualties likely reach hundreds of thousands, and it's televised, globally witnessed. Smartphones capture Javo executing civilians in the streets. News helicopters broadcast skyscraper collapses live. Social media spreads footage of Ogremon tearing through financial districts. The world can no longer pretend these are isolated accidents. This is biological warfare in a modern metropolis, streamed in real time to billions of viewers. So how does civilization continue after this? How do governments explain that a Chinese megacity was turned into a war zone by engineered bioweapons? How does anyone board a plane, enter a subway, or trust that their government can protect them when Lanshan proved that a single coordinated C-Virus deployment can collapse an entire modern city in hours? The series doesn't answer those questions. It just shows you the moment it all became impossible to ignore. Lanshan is the point where Resident Evil stops being horror and becomes history. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.